with Zane and Jude. I think we've been here 8 years. Is that right? 7 or 8 years. Roger asked me to kick us off this morning. I think this is the biggest class that I've ever attended at Wilmot since I've been here. So I'm really excited to get to know some new folks that I don't know. And I'm excited about the conversations we're having. So let's pray and then we'll get started. God, please quiet our minds this morning. Create room for the things that we're about to discuss. Anchor us so that we don't drift too far from your word. Keep our conversations near what you want to put on our hearts. Give us the ability to hear what we have to say with open minds and with minds that are full of grace. We love you and we thank you for everyone in this room. Pray in your son's name. Amen.
Good morning, everybody. How are y'all doing? I wore my cowboy boots today, so I don't know, Ashley. You may have a hard time. They add about 2 or 3 inches. Yeah, I'm never hot, and so I'm hot today. I don't know what that means. Just
Did your wife tell you that?
All the time.
Yeah. I have markers and I have this big old television that's not going to work, but I guess maybe I should get this. That's all right. We're going to get started.
You want that television moved so you can get to the board?
You want me to take my boots off, you said?
No, I said you want us to move the TV so you can get to the board.
That would be great, because you know I'm going back into it at least 2 or 3 times. Why don't we put it in that corner right there?
Which corner?
This TV.
All right, good.
I had to work yesterday. That does something to me when I have to work on Saturday. How many of you have to work on Saturday? I feel so sorry for you. It just does something to me. So I'm not quite all here. So let's first start by just talking about last Sunday. Anything that was left unsaid, any questions that were left unanswered, any thoughts that need to be thought out? Had lots of different conversations about the activity that we did. Any more processing of that we need to do? All right. I guess that's a good thing. So today I want us to go one more step into culture, and then we're gonna stop. We're going to kind of be through with the conversation around culture. And you might wonder, why this piece of the conversation continues. And hopefully today, you'll kind of get a better feel for why we continue to go down this road. Now, I've made these hash sheets for you, and on the back of them, they have all the definitions for culture that we've talked about thus far, except for cultural identity, which we're going to talk about today. And then on the front, there's an activity I want you to do. If you can look at just the definitions and not the activity, I'll pass it out now. If you're going to flip it over, I'm not going to pass it out.
I'll pass it.
Raise your...
Okay, that'll be 10. I'll hold it for you for a minute.
No.
I'm not going to.
Woo. So, I think one of the reasons that this conversation is so important, we've talked about over and over again, is because it gives us an opportunity to have this conversation in other arenas. And so when we find ourselves in places where what we believe about people, what we believe about who people are and why they're here and how they define themselves, we can kind of think back to the tools, hopefully, that we get out of this class. And one of the major tools, I mean, it is the tool, is again this idea of being created in God's image. And so, last night Paulette and I had a discussion about that. And, there are some truths about that exist for us that may not exist for a lot of people. And one of them is this: I can have a conversation with a person who is a believer about what it means to be made in God's image. And so when I see a non-believer, I can still have that same conversation. He or she may not understand it, but because I understand, there's more to them than the color of the skin, the mistakes they've made, the choices they've made. I can still speak from a point of, this is a person made in God's image. And so someone reminded us, on both sides of the discussion, we kind of start there. That's important because we were kind of debating last night, we can have that same conversation about, you're a Christian. We just can't have that same conversation because it's defined in different ways. And one of the things we're kind of struggling with now, I think, as a nation is, how do we find Christians? And what does it mean we were a Christian nation, or we are a Christian nation? We can't have the conversation around that. But a truth will always be, we are made in God's image. Mm-hmm. So last Sunday, I tried very hard to kind of separate this idea of image and culture. And I really wanted us to get to a point of, image it's stable, it's who we are, it's everything that God wanted us to be, that God wants us to be, made in His image. And it's a becoming process. It is a becoming process. It's becoming more and more like Him. It's that whole transformation that happens as we become followers of Him. But culture is different. And I think you remember my brother and I had a slight discussion here on the front row. Culture is different because culture is about some shared ideas. Culture can be learned. Culture can be regional, and so there's southern culture, and then there's northern culture, and then all kinds of culture in between. Culture can be about our language. If you have teenagers, there's a whole culture around how they text. And it's, Paulette asked me this week, what does BTW mean? And I said, by the way. Even I know that one, But I have to tell you, for a long time, I did not know what LOL meant. I was like, what does LOL mean? I thought it was a word. So culture can also be about a language, it can be about an attitude, it can be about fashion. And so there's a business culture that kind of dictates, you probably have on a nice pressed shirt and a tie and some slacks. And then there's kind of a casual business where you can wear khakis and a nice blazer, and you might even get away with some cowboy boots. Culture can also be about art, and there's some parts of the culture around art that we'll bring into the discussion later on, because a lot of the story of our nations. A lot of the story about our nation's history, especially around people of color, is recorded in art. And so you hear about the blues, you hear about the stories of pain and suffering. I'll probably play for you one of my favorite songs, I'll Never Go to Alabama. That's the song, not a statement, a declaration. And I'll probably play that for you because it really is kind of a picture of, where this music came from. And so culture is also learned. There are things about culture that when you are born in a particular part of a culture, you're just going to be a part of that. It's just who you are. It will not have to be spoken, it will just be understood. And so then we have to decide, especially as adults, how do we respond to the elements of that culture that we are not comfortable with? Okay, how do we respond to that? So there's an activity that I want us to do today, and it's going to kind of rock the boat a little bit, because last week didn't rock it enough. I know it. And here's why I want us to rock the boat a little bit. Daniel Hill describes this idea of understanding culture and its impact on how we interact with people in our relationships by saying this: it is a journey, it can be disorienting, it can be discomforting, it can be scary, it can be confusing, and it can cause disagreements. All of that around a journey into culture. Again, disorienting, discomforting, scary, confusing. We can even disagree about culture. Now, if you just think for a minute, you'll think of some elements of your cultural journey that fit into that. Maybe you were born up north and you moved to the south. And there were elements of Southern culture that you just found kind of disorienting. Maybe you have married into a family that has a very different culture that they bring to the table. And so you find ways to kind of work through that. What we have to remember as we're working through it is there are different reactions that people can take to this disorienting journey. And that's going to be really important, especially towards the end of the class. So now you have a cliffhanger. As we talk about culture here in just a minute, here's something that I want us to remember. I love quotes. I'm sure you guys can tell. Oscar Wilde, I love this. Every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. And that's kind of where this journey has to go. We have to remember that the journey is disorienting because we are trying to not only see the image of God in that other person, but we're trying to think of ways that we can help bring it out. How do we help people see and know the worth that the Father has placed in them? How great is the love the Father has lavished on us. That we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. And so the journey is disorienting because we have to find ways as believers to kind of put meaning into those sockets where people are going, this just doesn't make sense. This doesn't gel well with what I think or with what I feel. We have to help them navigate that. So I'm going to give us an activity, give you an activity. I'm going to actually talk while you're completing the activity. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So part of a journey around culture is kind of this idea of identifying your culture. Who am I and how do I fit into the bigger scheme of things? And so I have an activity here. It's real nice and pretty. And it has a word bank on it. And the words are categorized in columns that kind of describe different aspects of culture. So I'm going to kind of talk about an interaction of Jesus in culture, while you're kind of looking at this word bank and circling which word in each column or which description in each column best defines you. So there may be a column about age, there's a column about ability, there's a column about gender, there's a column about race, religion, sexual orientation, and social class. And I made 80 copies. That's all I can say is I made 80 copies. I actually think I have some extras somewhere. They just don't look the same. Here, you can have the original. Here you go. You could tear that in half if you can tear. I can't tear straight. Here, Jim Dunn, I bet you can tear straight. Okay, so as you're working on that, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of time. It's not a difficult exercise. I'm going to give you just a little bit of time. I want to read to you an encounter Do we need any more? Does anybody back in the back there?
Bring a pen, teacher.
No, the teacher does not bring pens because the students are supposed to.
Now, you done shamed me once.
What's that saying? Uh-oh. I didn't bring any, man. Here's one. Here. Now, you know what? I got 2 pens here, but they're my nice pens.
Well, I won't take them.
Okay, that's a good thing, probably.
I'll take
I heard Fred was letting me borrow one.
Socioeconomic status. SES, socioeconomic status, SES. So I want to read to you a story from the Gospel of John. And I want to read this story because, well, there are a couple of reasons. And there are some ministers in the room. If you feel the need to speak into this, I am more than willing for you to do that. I'm going to read this story because I think part of the struggle in even understanding the Bible is the culture. And just understanding the Jewish culture, Hebrew culture, just understanding what that all meant. I like this story because it is a place where clearly Jesus gets to a place where there is a cultural norm, but he makes another decision and begins to, in his decision, kind of move from, this discomfort, this disorientation to a place of comfort and hope and grace. So I'm going to read this, and I just want you to just listen. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." So, where are some places where culture interacts with this particular story? What do you hear? I mean, from what we know about Scripture, where are some places where culture was kind of prominent in this particular story?
Definitely gender.
There's some gender issues? Yeah, because where's the dude? Again, if they're caught in the act, I would think the dude would be really close. But he's not here in the story. Okay, so there's some gender issues. What are some other issues?
What was the real purpose in bringing the woman
Okay, what was
to
the
Christ?
what was the real purpose in bringing the woman to Christ? And I don't know where you're quite going with that, Jim, but what was said about why she should be brought to Christ? In the law, it says,
Okay, I'll say only the woman was brought.
okay, what was the purpose in bringing only the woman to Christ?
And if it was really about the sin, they would have brought the man too. To answer your question, I think it's religion that's going, that aspect of the culture that's big in play there.
Yeah.
The test, they're testing.
Yeah, and hear me, I think there's more than one, but I think you're right. I think that, they went back in their mind and said, wait a minute, we're pretty clear that the law says, and remember, culture is all about beliefs and norms and practices. It's about those things we just do. We don't have to talk about them anymore because we just know that we do them. At your table, if you join hands and say prayer, when you start having kids and it's 2 or 3 or 4 and they're, 2 and 3 and 4, they start reaching out and join hands. Why? You don't have to tell them. Well, you may have to tell them a couple of times. But after a while, you don't have to tell them to join hands because it's part of the culture of your family. And so these people have brought this woman to Jesus, and they're saying, in our culture, we just have to stone her. So there's another place where culture kind of plays in there. There's some more. Roger.
I would think the temple courts is about forgiveness, it's not about accusation.
Okay. Raul.
I'm not sure how accurate this was, but I heard someone say that at the time of Christ, the system had been so corrupted that it was okay if he was a married man, to sleep with a prostitute. You just weren't allowed to do it with another married woman, or vice versa. So I think that's why the man, because in the eyes of, I guess, the Good Old Boy network, that he was okay because it was a prostitute.
Social class.
And so, and that would be a cultural shift if they had truly gotten to that point. I've never heard that before. Anyone else? And Roger, I thought you were going to go to the temple court. I mean, there was a culture of, as we said this morning, expectancy around the court. I'm going here to be taught. I'm going here to learn. And Jesus, rabbi, teacher,